it's Heather here at Virtua, talking about men's health. What is the difference between a sprain and a fracture? Let's find out. Bruno, do you know what the difference between a fracture and a sprain is for me?
Probably not.
A fracture basically swells up. I had one on my knuckle right here, and my whole hand swelled up.
Do you know the difference between a fracture and a sprain?
Yes.
I think the break or the sprain is probably less than the break.
Have you had either?
A fracture? Football injury.
Ooh. Can you tell me the difference between a sprain and a fracture?
I guess a sprain is with the ligaments and a fracture with the bones.
Hot or cold for a sprained ankle?
Usually ice is the way to go.
Ice or heat?
Heat.
Cold or hot?
Cold.
Hot or cold do you put on a sprain?
Good question. I don't know. A little of both, maybe. Mix it up, you know.
Well, let's find out what the doc has to say. Dr. Bernardini, what is the difference between a sprain and a fracture?
That's a great question. A sprain is an injury to a ligament, whereas a fracture is an injury to the bone. And they're completely different structures with completely different treatment protocols. Typically, ligaments take about 6 weeks to heal, but the ligament itself is very different in its healing process, whereas a bone also takes about 6 weeks but heals in a much more solid fashion.
What's good for a sprain, heat or ice?
Well, that's a great question. Typically, we've recommended ice for acute injuries, and a sprain is typically an acute injury. Heat has also been recommended, but more as a contrast to ice. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of science between heat, ice, which one's better. In fact, there's a lot of science now that's showing that ice doesn't really have a change in the natural history of an injury. But if it makes you feel better, we recommend using it. So in the short term, it can be used for a pain relief measure, but it's not going to change the fact that you're going to heal over probably 6 weeks.
Thanks, Dr. Bernardini. So if you're really unsure if you have a sprain or a fracture, just by looking at it, please contact your primary care provider.